Okay, continuing with our idea of superstitious or non-contingent events, let's try and apply it to a human circumstance. So imagine there are a bunch of children playing, and one of the children will occasionally do something on an unpredictable basis, or really it could be a predictable basis, but he does something that the other children find very funny. Would one child's funny action, which induces laughter and pleasure and so forth in other children, couldn't that serve much like food for a hungry pigeon? That is, seeing, experiencing things that are humorous and entertaining would be appetitive. It'd be a pleasant event, like food for a hungry pigeon. Now, here's the critical thing. Let's call the child Tommy. Tommy's funny behavior, whatever it is, has nothing to do with the other children's behavior. They don't do anything to make him act funny. He just occasionally acts funny. But it is funny. It's very funny, very pleasurable. What might the other children tend to do? Think of all the things they might do in a classroom, wandering from here to there, playing with toys all over the place. But if Tommy is occasionally funny, would their behavior become less variable? Would they tend to be closer to him? Now, does that mean they evaluated all the things they might do? I could go color, I could play with the clay, I could go mess with the sand box, etc. And they evaluated and decided to stay near funny Tommy? Or is it just the case that his humor has reduced the variability of their behavior? Because if you're nearby, something funny happens, that's a pleasant event. So, how would we determine the difference between they're by him just because they're not doing as many different things versus they're by him because being by him has been strengthened? Well, it's pretty simple. If being near Tommy is simply the result of the fact they're not doing other stuff versus they are being by him. So let me say that again because it's a little confusing. I'm by Tommy because I'm not doing something else. Variability's been reduced. Or I'm by Tommy because that specific behavior is dominant. That specific behavior will occur. That is, it's strong. How would I determine which of those is true? Well, pretty simple. If I present an alternative, attractive opportunity, and the children all run away from Tommy, they ditch him pretty quickly, that is, the behavior is easily disrupted, then it wasn't very strong. If I present an alternative and the behavior persists, then it's very strong. And what we find with non-contingent events, like I'm describing here, his funny behavior has nothing to do, it doesn't depend on them, is it's very easy to disrupt. It's not strong. Next slide. All right. So we know that even non-contingent reinforcement, non-contingent events can reduce the variability behavior. And reducing the variability behavior is good. If we gain control of variability, then we can begin to produce specific responses. We can begin to lead individuals into engaging in particular behaviors. So the question becomes, how do I gain control of the variability behavior using reinforcement? And that process is known as shaping. Shaping. defined as reinforcing successive approximations of a target behavior. I'm going to suggest that you take a moment, pause the audio, and go to this YouTube site and watch the shaping of a rat's behavior. When you come back, we'll continue. Okay, so I assume you watched the video of the rat, and let's talk about a couple of things. First, I sure hope you don't think the rat was figuring out how to get food. The rat was analyzing, if I do this, I get food. If I don't do that, I get food. I wouldn't attribute such conceptual reasoning to a rat. Rather, the presentation of food to a hungry rat constitutes a reinforcer. And reinforcing any response accomplishes two things. It reduces the variability of behavior, that is, responding became more stereotypic. We saw this a little bit in the video, but I'll explain why you didn't see more obvious stereotypy. It also strengthens or increases the likelihood of a particular response, the reinforced behavior. Now, it's a little hard to see the reduction in variability in this video because they edited out the periods between each of the stages. So reinforcing the rat for sniffing the bar, reinforcing the rat for approaching the front wall. If they'd included the entire timeline, you would have seen as they began to reinforce approaching the front wall, the rats wandering around the chamber began to disappear. So the rat ended up at the front wall. And then if you reinforce sniffing the bar, what the rat did near the front wall became less variable. He spent more and more time around the bar, etc. So the change in variability was occurring, it's just not as obvious because the video was shortened in time. So, less variability was definitely occurring, and that's going to be an important thing. Similarly, response strength was increasing. We're going to spend a bit of time focusing on variability. Next slide. So, what I'm going to suggest you do, you can stop the audio and go do this, or complete this unit and then do it afterwards. But there's a little exercise in the folder, in the Unit 2 folder. It's labeled Shaping a Human, and it's going to walk you through trying to shape a human to make a mark in a particular location on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And the directions are in there. It's not required, but if you do it, you may get some insights into shaping. It's okay if you try it and it doesn't work. I just want you to try it so you can then reflect on that experience, and we'll talk about it. So, here's what I want you to think about. If you reinforce a particular response, what's going to happen? Well, first, it becomes less variable. That is, subsequent behavior becomes more like the reinforced behavior. Is that good or bad? So, if you're trying to shape behavior, change its form from its current form to a target behavior, then as it becomes more stereotypic, that is, you have less variability, how do you reinforce a new form? If the behavior becomes more and more alike, it gets harder and harder to reinforce new responses that are closer to the target. So, stereotypy makes shaping harder. And before we get into the Eckermann study, I want you to think about that for a moment. Let's imagine I'm trying to shape someone to tie her shoes. And so I want to reinforce that complex behavior of making the bow. So if I reinforce cross the laces, and that becomes super dominant, so all the individual does is cross the laces, do you see that it's going to be more difficult for me to move the behavior toward cross the laces, now fold them back toward one another to make the loop that we know goes into tying a shoelace. Stereotypy limits the behavioral variability. I have less to work with, less to reinforce. It may make the one response, the intermediate response, very strong, but it may make it more difficult for me to reach a final target.